Hello everyone. Today, I'd like to start this video off with a story. When I was a small child, I used to enjoy reading stories with my mother. The Cat in the Hat, Frog and Toad, and by the time I was a little older, things like The Magic Treehouse. One day, when I was 7 years old, my mom picked me up from school and said something along the lines of, "Hey, I heard about this new book series where a kid meets the characters from Greek mythology." Now, believe it or not, but at 7 years old, I was not the esteemed intellectual scholar who stands before you today. At this point, I didn't even know what Greek mythology even was, and had absolutely no idea what my mother was talking about. So I said whatever the 7-year-old equivalent of, yeah mom, sounds cool, who enthusiastically replied, "Great! I bought the audiobook for the first one. Should we listen?" Yeah, sure, I replied. My mom put the CD into the car radio, and from the very first chapter, I was hooked. Every single sentence was written with so much wit and charm, which only assisted Rick Riordan's masterful storytelling. The book served as my introduction to Greek mythology, and what an introduction it was. I reread the series over the summer, and I'll be the first to say they hold up exceptionally well, even almost 20 years later. Of course, I'm assuming that everyone watching this video knows who Percy Jackson is, but there's a very strong chance that most of you guys have no idea what I'm talking about. So, let me explain. Don't worry, no major spoilers. Everything I'm about to talk about is explained in the first few chapters of the first book. In the world of Percy Jackson, Greek mythology is real. All of the ancient Greek myths really happened, and all of the creatures and entities from Greek mythology really existed, including the gods and goddesses themselves, of course. The gods and goddesses are still alive in modern times, and it's eventually revealed that over the course of several millennia, they've traveled to wherever the heart of Western civilization currently is. For example, they initially resided in Greece, but a few years later moved to Rome, which explains why Roman mythology was a thing. They later moved to other countries, and in the 2000s, the time frame that the books were released, the gods reside in the United States of America, and Mount Olympus is hidden on the top floor of the Empire State Building. The reason why normal people don't know about the existence of Greek gods, goddesses, and other entities from Greek mythology is because of something referred to as the mist, which is something that distorts reality and prevents normal people, who are referred to as mortals, from seeing what's really happening. For instance, if a normal person encounters the Minotaur, because of the mist, they'd probably just see a really big, buff, football player-looking guy. There are a few people who can see through the mist, though, and those people consist of other entities and creatures from Greek mythology, demigods, who I'll talk about in a moment, and a very, very small percentage of mortals. What we know as World War II was actually a war between many of the gods and goddesses, who were essentially using the countries involved like pieces on a chessboard to help turn the tide in their respective favor. Because of World War II's devastating impact, the three major gods, which consist of Zeus, the god of thunder, lightning, and pretty much the sky itself, Poseidon, the god of the sea, and Hades, the god of the dead, all made a pact that they would never father a demigod ever again. For a while, everything was fine, until it was revealed that a kid named Percy Jackson, who up until now thought he was just a normal but troubled kid, was revealed to have secretly been the son of Poseidon, who didn't tell the other gods that he had broken his pact. And that's basically the starting point for the rest of the story. There's going to be a Percy Jackson series that's set to release tomorrow, at the time of recording this video, on Disney+, which I, for one, am very excited about, and plan to review once the whole thing's been released. But before we get to that, I think we need to talk about the other adaptation of the books. That would, of course, be the Percy Jackson movies. Saying that the Percy Jackson films aren't held in a high regard among the fandom would be the understatement of the century. From what I've gathered, they violently dislike these films, and in fairness, I can sort of get where they're coming from. When I was a kid, it was announced that they were releasing the first movie right after I had finished reading The Lightning Thief, and I was ecstatic. When I actually watched the movie, I remember feeling a bit disappointed. It's not that I thought it was bad per se, it was almost what I wanted, but they blatantly skipped over crucial parts of the story, which was very uncool. I vaguely remember talking to my mom about this as a kid, in which she responded by saying something along the lines of, "Well, that's why the book is always better than the movie." "Why?" I asked. "Well, because movies are shorter, and they don't have the room to fit in some of the things that make the story better," she replied. "Why didn't they just make it into a TV show?" I asked. "Well, that probably would have been harder," she replied. "Why?" I asked. "I don't know," she replied, and after that, I was off to bed. After my mom's reasoning started to sink in, I enjoyed the movie more. Being a kid, I was blissfully unaware of the abysmal reception it was getting from the fandom, so I just sort of shrugged my shoulders and said, hey, it's almost what I wanted, and that's better than nothing. But deep down in the recesses of my mind, I couldn't help but think that it could have been better. I went in to see if monsters with this mindset and felt similarly about it. This summer, while in the midst of rereading the books, I rewatched both films. At this point, I hadn't seen either of them in years and was well aware of the notorious reputation they've developed. I went into them fully expecting them to be terrible. I was completely expecting this to be a case where nostalgia goggles made me remember a piece of media better than it really was, and to be completely disappointed, especially while in the midst of reading the books. And after my rewatch, I have to say, they're really not that bad, and I feel like they're a bit overhated. Okay, wait, calm down, don't start a riot.
That's a great idea! Let's start a riot.
Okay, wait, stop, hang on, wait! Before you guys start and feather me, just hear me out for a second. Are these movies perfect adaptations of the books? No, not even close. Do they have some very crucial flaws? Definitely. That being said, are they completely unsalvageable? No. And I think it has a lot of redeeming qualities that a lot of people look over. For one, I really like the cast. I think Logan Lerman did an especially good job as Percy. I thought Alexandra Daddario was pretty solid as Annabeth, and I enjoyed Brandon T. Jackson's performance as Grover, even though it was a different take on the character when compared to the books. The film's got a few complaints about how the characters were a little bit older than they were in the books, but that didn't really bother me, since during my reread over the summer, I thought the characters were a bit too young to be going on quests and battling monsters. Though admittedly, I think the films went a bit too far in the other direction and depicted them as being a little too much on the older side. During my reread of the books, I pretty much imagined every character being 2 years older than the books said they were, which A. serves as the perfect middle ground between the books and the movies, B. makes the main cast of characters at an ever so slightly more reasonable age to be fighting monsters and going on quests, and C. since Percy himself would have been 14 at the start of the series and 18 for The Last Olympian, I feel like this aging fits better thematically, with him still being a kid at the beginning of the story and ending with him officially being grown up. I'd also like to give props to Sean Bean and Kevin McKidd, who I think both did a pretty good job as Zeus and Poseidon respectively, and I also enjoyed Stanley Tucci's slightly comedic take on Dionysus. While talking about the gods, I think now would be a good time to mention that the effects used for some of the gods and other entities are tremendous, especially given the time. The Fury looks amazing for 2010. The Hippocampi also looks pretty good given the standards, and most of all, look at how cool Hades looks. Now, I'm sure that a few people weren't fans of the design because it wasn't accurate to his depiction in the books, and I'll be fair and say that's a reasonable criticism against it. However, counterpoint, look at how cool he is. 7-year-old me wanted an action figure of him so badly. But despite all these positives, like I said earlier, the film isn't without its flaws, all of which mainly lie within the film's story. I'll warn you now, I'm going to be covering spoilers for the films and light spoilers for the books, so if you're curious about watching them yourself, skip to the conclusion, the timestamp will be on screen. Like I said earlier, the first movie cut out some major scenes from the book. Most notably, in my opinion, they didn't show or even reference Ares at all, despite him being absolutely crucial to the plot of the original story. They also completely changed the reveal that Luke was the one who really stole Zeus's lightning bolt. In the books, it wasn't revealed until the very end, back at Camp Half-Blood, and was partially used as a way to set up the next book. In the movie, it was revealed right before Percy brought the lightning bolt back to Zeus, and the two had a fight scene, which, don't get me wrong, wasn't bad, but makes it harder to set up sequels since we already saw the main villain get his comeuppance. Additionally, the movie didn't reference Kronos at all, which was a centerpiece of Luke's motivation in the original book and helped to lay the groundwork for the central conflict of the series. In Sea of Monsters, the film's neglect for the original story told in the books only doubles down. This is mostly apparent in the movie's use of the mist, which also contradicts how it was implied to work in the first film, the characterization of Tyson the Cyclops, and most egregiously, that really weird scene towards the end where Luke unleashes Kronos and the main cast managed to defeat him with relative ease. This decision was baffling for a lot of reasons, and is definitely, at least partially, why the series never got another installment. It's very easy to point to these movies and ask questions like, how could they have cut that out? Or, why didn't they include this? And I think the reasoning comes down to the fact that my mother really was right all those years ago. The fatal flaw for both of these films, especially the first, was that they were trying to tell a 10-hour story in just under 2. Because of these time constraints, they were forced to cut corners, and in doing so, resulted in an inferior story when compared to the books. At the end of the day, were these films good adaptations of the books? Ultimately, no. and the fans' disappointment was and is understandable. With that being said, though, do I believe that the people behind these movies genuinely tried their best with what they were given wholeheartedly? Because of this, I think that 7-year-old me was also right, and that it should have been a TV show right from the get-go, and I have high hopes that the new series on Disney Plus will be proof of that.